I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Expats editor Matt Friedman. Matt, you are one of two editors on Expats. Alex O'Flynn was the other one. You edited the
Yes.
pilot, plus episodes 4, 5, and the series finale. So what is the reasoning behind splitting the task between two or more editors in this way?
It's just a massive amount of footage and a massive amount of work. And our editor's process, the editorial process, it just takes time. It's unlike production where you have a set amount of hours in order to capture the scene and then you have to move on. With editing, you'll do a first version of the scene and then you'll watch it as it falls in the entire film, or in this case, the entire, TV show. And it'll need to change because it becomes apparent when you watch everything start to finish that there's certain things that you no longer need, or there are certain things that you need. So it's very much like, I don't know, for a long time, I made the analogy of like molding clay. You know what I mean? Like you can't just go boom, hot, right? You shape and you shape too far, and then you shape back, and then you play with it until you find the exact right aesthetically pleasing end result. It's definitely finding it.
Yeah.
So it takes too much time. And Expats as a series was like 6.5 hours of material. Like, that's a
Yeah,
massive
it's a
um
lot.
in a schedule that was similar to some feature films, which I was going to say, which are an hour and a half. That seems to be less and less true nowadays.
Yeah,
But even at 3 hours, that's double the material.
that's right. I mean, the joke would be, Thelma Schoonmaker is probably just looking at 6.5 hours and thinking, that's nothing. That's just a short film for me. But anyway, so, I was wondering, you collaborated with Lulu Wang on her film The Farewell, and you're back
Yeah.
together on Expats. So what do you most value about working with her and wanting you to come back to her fold over and over again?
Yeah, because this is I also cut her first feature. So I've done two features with her in this entire series and a couple of shorts thrown in there as well. And what I love about Lulu is she is just such a smart filmmaker. And everything about the stories that she tells, both the content and the emotions and the acting and the way the camera moves and the way things are lit, is just all in support of this end emotion, because she's a very emotional storyteller, right? The Farewell was very emotional. This is very emotional. Um, and she really just has this vast array of tools that she uses to get at those emotions. And I remember, when I first started working with her, because I came originally from a studio comedy background. Like that was where I cut my teeth as an editor. So everything in, like, I'll say the first half of my career was like fast, fast, cut it fast. And Lulu, I remember one scene in particular in the Farewell, where she wanted to stay on this character for a long time. And it was the scene where How starts crying at the wedding. And I remember asking her, are you sure you want to stay on it for this long? Are you sure? And she was like, Maddie, because she calls me Maddie, just trust me on this one. But what's so interesting about that is that shot actually was cut absolutely as tight as possible. And she shoots, and there's a lot of like one shots in expats as well.
Yeah.
And we have very detailed discussions about how long to sit in these shots. And it's always, what is the shortest amount of time that we can sit in this shot and achieve the end result? in that shot with How crying, she wanted the audience first to laugh, and then after that to feel uncomfortable and bring that feeling of discomfort to the point where the audience could identify with Billy, the main character, because that's essentially what she was feeling in the entire movie.
Yeah.
And then once we achieve that, once we think that we've left it long enough for the audience to get to that point of discomfort, we're out. So even though you'll watch Expats and you'll see a lot of shots where there's maybe nothing physically happening, they're all filled to the frame with emotion and story.
Yeah.
And then once we achieve that, we're out.
Yeah, I want to talk about one in particular because I always like to think about on a show like this, when does the audience first encounter the main character? And in this show, that's arguably Margaret, played by Nicole Kidman. And that first shot in the pilot episode is one long oneer from behind her that slowly circles around her so that we eventually see her face until we see the drawing that she has with her. And then we get some cutting as she abruptly leaves the table. And while she's sitting at the table, there's a lot going on in the frame. I thought that was so interesting and it really brought me into the center of the story. How risky, though, are scenes like that to get right?
They're very risky, and they take a lot more time than if you're going to shoot conventional coverage, because everything about that shot had to be correct. Well, in this day and age of visual effects, that's not exactly true, but all the performances have to be exactly correct. I remember when I was in film school 30 years ago, one of the professors teaching the equation dolly equals time times two. So if you're going to do a dolly shot, it's going to take you twice as long to shoot that shot as if you were going to just lock the camera down and shoot it. But a oneer is time times 10.
Yeah,
You have to rehearse not only the character blocking, which is crucial, but the camera blocking as well. And everything has to be perfect. It comes up a lot in the teaching that I do at AFI, because there's a lot of fellows there who, obviously oneers are sexy. They want to do oneers, but the bar is incredibly high. And it is, as you said, incredibly risky. And if one part of it doesn't work, the whole thing doesn't work.
yeah.
So it really, yeah, it's a huge risk, and when it works, it can pay huge dividends if it's designed correctly.
Yeah,
But there has to be a reason for it, right? It can't just be a oneer for the sake of a oneer, or a oneer for showboating. It
that's right.
has to have a reason.
And that's what I was wondering because if the risk proposition is so high and also it's such a technical shot to get right, you could just literally phone it in and just cut it and shoot it in a standard way. Why? Why would Lulu want to do it that way? And why particularly this scene when we get introduced to Margaret when she's so alone and she's so pensive and she's so grieving?
Yeah, well, imagine that scene cut for coverage, cut with coverage. And then at that point, it becomes a scene about a woman who's planning a party, and maybe she feels, I don't know, a little off, but it becomes a very sort of logistical scene. But with the oneer not revealing Margaret's face, it sets the tone for the entire series, the mystery of it, the withholding of information, which is in the DNA of the entire series, right? How and when we parse out the information about the story, because it is not, as you know, it's not done in a linear way. We're constantly withholding things from the audience and revealing them sometimes in unexpected places. That was the reason that was the reason for that shot. There's a very long oneer at the beginning of 105 when the 90-minute episode, when the camera is pushing in on all the helpers singing Roar, and it pushes in very slowly and ends up centering on Puri, who is similarly our main character in that episode. So it's
Mm.
kind of the same situation, right? We could have cut that and it would have, as a scene, functioned fine because it's musical, there's energy to the music, but this push in again just sort of gives you the sense of discovery, the sense of we do a lot with sound in that as well. So it starts off very noisy and there's a lot of background sounds. And if you go back and watch that, as the camera gets closer and closer, those things slowly and one by one start to drop away. At the same time, the music, which at the beginning of the shot is coming mono from this little, recorder that they're singing to, spreads wider and wider and becomes fuller and fuller as we're going into, the beginning of the shot is the reality of what's happening. And then as we push in on Puri, this is her dream. This is how she sees it. It's not her standing in the rain with a bunch of people and sirens and traffic and car horns going off left and right. It's this beautiful, powerful song that she's singing.
Yeah. It's
So,
it's
yeah,
it's a beautiful scene because I had the same thought. I felt so like it was telegraphed to me, okay, we're going to now be coming into these people's world that we haven't really been in before. So but get ready for something a little different. That was my initial layman's impression. And then
yeah,
I realized this show, it's an extended runtime. It's a lot about the housekeepers, and it's a departure from the show's usual look and feel. So does that mean,
yeah.
apart from interesting oneers like the beginning, did you have to change up the show's pacing or anything else about the show's editing for this particular episode?
Well, it's also in a different aspect ratio.
Yeah.
It's in a widescreen format where the rest of all the other episodes are 16:9 or 185, I think, actually. Um, and it's certainly more cinematic. It's cut to be more cinematic. Um, in terms of the cutting, no, not really, because the end goal is always to get at the emotion. So if anything, 105 is a little more atmospheric in terms of its emotionality than the rest of the series. So maybe it was slowed down a little, but then, going back to what is a one or four, the bingo game that the maids play that comes almost immediately after the roar scene that is a oneer, is not in a oneer and was never meant to be in a oneer because there's a visceral energy to that interaction where these women, the banter is just so sharp and so back and forth, and we can use cutting to help the audience feel that. Even if that banter was as fast paced as it was, if that were shot in a oneer, wouldn't have the same feeling to it, wouldn't have the same energy.
No.
So getting back to your original question, that's really what I love about working with Lulu is everything is so thought through and like so smartly put together
Yeah.
on just so many different levels. It's like peeling an onion. It's like there's
Yeah.
stuff under stuff under stuff under stuff under stuff.
That makes it so interesting and compelling for the audience who is following. We're following the story. We're really interested and compelled by the actors' performances, but there's so much then going on technically and creatively. that we're not supposed to notice this stuff because we're so involved. But like, I tend to watch something maybe again if I'm interviewing, and then I start to notice the little. And that's why I was going to ask you this final question about expats, and that is, given that the show relies heavily on Lulu's distinctive impressionistic atmospheric style of filmmaking,
Mhm.
did you have any guiding principles that you wanted to follow when deciding on the rhythm of particular scenes that you can give me an example about? Like, do you choose between close-ups and wide shots and dolly shots for a particular reason? Or is it really just completely dependent on story?
Well, yes. It, it's completely dependent on story, but really it's completely dependent on emotion. So whatever camera angle, there's so many different moving parts. Like ideally, if you're in a dramatic scene, right, you want to start wide and get closer and closer and closer as the scene gets more and more dramatic. Sometimes you're unable to do that because the performance was better, in a wider shot. So in those instances, it's about trying to figure out which is going to be, what's the right way to put this? What are the pros and cons, right? Like being closer is going to feel emotionally more intimate, but the performance isn't quite as good. Being wider, we have this better performance, but it doesn't feel quite as emotional. Well, we can blow up the wide shot a little bit. Let's do that. Um, are there any other editorial things that we can do? Maybe sit in the shot a little bit longer in order to give the audience time to find the character themselves, whereas if you're cutting in close, you don't need as much time to find the character. So we think about things like that, but the end goal is the emotion. So whenever I'm cutting anything, I'm thinking about, is this getting me to where I want the audience to be emotionally? And tracking in my head where I think they are at any given point in that journey and what I can do to help make it more powerful for them. Um, that's what it really all comes down to. So, the script is a blueprint, and to some extent, the dailies are a blueprint also. What we do in the cutting room, they sometimes refer to as the final rewrite. And Lulu is definitely a believer in that, you know. So the story is in the script what the story is before they shoot. And then the story is in the dailies what it is before you get to post. And then the story is in post, hopefully, the absolute best version of the script.
Wow, that's so fascinating, Matt. There's so much that I'm still learning about this craft, but thank you so much for being so insightful about your experience on Expats today, and congratulations on some really beautiful work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.